Hello and welcome to News Laundry. Today we have a very special guest with us today, Professor Devinder Sharma. Professor, welcome to News Laundry. Just a brief introduction about Professor Sharma. He is a food and trade policy analyst. He's an award-winning Indian journalist, writer, eminent thinker, and a researcher well known and respected for his views on food and trade policy. He got his MSc in plant breeding and genetics. He is also a professor at large at the CSK Himachal Pradesh Agriculture University, Palampur in India, from where he had graduated and got his MSc degree. The magazine The Week in 2009 listed Professor Sharma among the 25 most valuable Indians, calling him Green Chomsky as opposed to Red Chomsky. Amongst his recent works include 4 books, GATT and India. Professor Sharma has written extensively on GATT and other world trade agreements, the politics of agriculture, GATT to WTO, Seeds of Despair, In the Famine Trap, and in Hindi, Bhook Ka Asli Chehra. Professor Sharma, welcome to News Laundry. Let's begin with your less controversial remarks. You've said stock market will lead the world towards extinction of human race. And you've also added growth economics is nothing but violent economics. In fact, your good friend Professor Vandana Shiva has said something very similar, which is economic growth is anti-life. Would you like to comment on that? Why do you specifically feel that stock market will lead to the extinction of human race?
No, first of all, I'm very glad that you have been able to notice that particular statement or particular analysis that I did. My argument is very simple. I think if you look at the way the entire globe is going topsy-turvy, especially in view of the climate change debate that we see, it is quite obvious that the kind of model that we have brought in for last several decades now is the one which is based on exploitation of natural resources. So the more you exploit the natural resources, the more you are creating a problem for the existence of the planet, I would say. And now in that connection, the most important part is being played by the stock exchange.
Right.
Because when the stocks go up, we rejoice, the media rejoices all over the world. And basically what the stocks are trying to bank upon is how to exploit the natural resources. The more the natural resources exploit, the more the stocks go up. So eventually, if that is the parameter or that is the barometer to assess the damage to the planet, I think the one thing which stands out is the role stock exchanges play, and why everyone is quiet all over the world not mentioning about stock exchange, because that's politically incorrect to say,
right,
and perhaps economically incorrect also to say. So nobody is taking on the cudgels in that manner when we say that we have to ensure that the global climate is to be taken care of and so on, but the primary reason for it is the exploitation of natural resources, which is linked to stock exchange.
So you would actually like the stock markets to be not there?
I'm saying
what's the alternative?
See, I'm saying that stock exchange basically are the casinos, you know, where the rich come and play, and they are the ones who then talk about the entire economy being looking very graceful or looking very buoyant, that you use the term, especially in journalism. But the point is, if you just look at whether it's an American exchange or whether it's the global exchange that you see via the Indians or the Europeans and so on, you will always see hardly 3 to 4% of the people benefiting from the stock exchange. So when we say that what is the alternative, is that 3-4% the alternative? What about the rest of the world, 95% or 97 people who do not assess stock exchange or stock markets for their benefits? Are they not the beneficiary of a system where we should be ensuring that everything is in harmony so that we can live in sustainable manner for centuries together?
Right. And in fact, carrying on from your views on the stock markets, you are also quite anti-globalization. In fact, you say globalization further strengthens the monopoly control, and what globalization has done, you said, is simply brought together all the haves, I beg your pardon, all the haves from each country. Now, another person is anti-globalization recently in the news, Donald Trump. So, Are your views in sync with people who are anti-globalization throughout, irrespective of?
I don't follow Donald Trump, so pardon my understanding of him. But let me be very clear. What the globalization has done, especially if you see after the WTO came into effect, which was in 1995. Since then, if you have seen the way globalization has progressed, each country, if I can simplify that in a manner that people can understand.
Sure.
Each country has a north, each country has a south.
Right.
Now the north of all countries have come together, whether it's America, whether it's India, Bangladesh or Pakistan, they've all come together, which means the rich people.
By north you mean the more prosperous?
That's right. Those who are rich, they have come together, and they are the ones who are benefiting, trying to ensure that all policies are manipulated to their gain. The south, which each country has, basically the common people or the poor people or the average people, if you look at across the globe, they are the ones who are outside the preamble of globalization. So my way of looking at globalization would be when the south joins hand, not only it should benefit the north. Now if you look at India also, when we are celebrating the 25 years of economic reforms.
Right.
It is a pro-rich economic reforms. Every day you'll find, or every week you'll find, they are trying to manipulate policies, trying to ensure most tax reforms and so on. Most pampered section of the society are the rich people, the industries of India.
But Professor, is it not a fact that, in fact, this week is the one where, as you correctly put it, we are celebrating 25 years. In fact, today's Sunday's papers are full of what Manmohan Singh heralded. Is it not a fact that the general income, the outlook for the poor people of this country has actually looked up in the last 25 years?
How do you define general income? If the assets of Ambani's or Adani's go up, that also adds on to the average income. My income may not be going up. The income of my driver may not be going up in that manner. But the way the income of the rich is going up, that also has a impact on the way we define the average income.
Right.
Now let me make it little clear. If you are saying that it has benefited, if you just see the economic, the NSSO does a expenditure survey. The 2014 expenditure survey tells us that in cities, if a person is spending more than 6,000 rupees a month, and in a village 2,050 rupees a month, roughly, if I remember those figures correctly, then you are in the top 5 of the country's bracket. Now, if top 5 of the bracket means that if you are spending 6,000 rupees per month in New Delhi, you are in top 5, it tells you what would be the condition of the remaining 95 in this country. So where has the benefit gone? Agar 6,000 rupees is a good income, according to what we now see in the newspapers today. My God, the income has gone up so much. And look at the expenditure statement. It tells us that incomes have not gone up in that manner. We are taking averages very cleverly to suit our interest, but only the top 5% has gained in this country. What about the remaining 95%? Let me give you just one example to illustrate that. The income of of farmers in 17 states of India. This is what the Economic Survey 2016 tells us. The income of farmers in 17 states of India is rupees 20,000 a year. 20,000 rupees a year is the income of farmers in 17 states. You will be shocked. And this comes to about 1,660 rupees per month. Is that what economic, the gain in income has been from the economic reforms that we brought in? I think there's something fundamentally going wrong. It's only that 5%.
I mean, if I may interrupt you, I think we want to broaden the base. In fact, what you talked about, the agricultural income and everything, I have a few points that I'd like to ask you, specifically on your 10-point agenda that you set out for the agricultural policy. But let me come back to the growth and the income prospects and the stock market. So what you say is growth economics has heralded the beginning of the end of the world. In fact, the process is already on. Only the economists refuse to see it, and since the economists have been paid to be quiet, the media too refuses to spot the evil. And you also say that by the time the stock market succeed in plundering the earth's resources, making it absolutely inhospitable for man to survive, the rich and the elite would have escaped to the moon. Now, you honestly believe that in 100 years, humans would actually be on the brink of extinction because of globalization, because of stock markets, because of the growth that you just
Well, if you
talked
just
about?
look at the report of the International Panel on Climate Change, the report says very clearly that the world is at a tripping point.
Right.
If we don't reform or we don't really readjust the way we look at economics in the next 10, 15 years, we're going to be, it will be a kind of a difficult situation to live.
Right.
We all know, in fact, many people have been saying that you may die of climate change. There's more probability that you will die of climate change than of a heart attack now, at the pace at which the climate is going topsy-turvy. Now, in those conditions, and what is the G20 doing, what is the G7 doing, or what are the Indian economists doing, are basically pushing the same kinds of economic reforms which are at the base of the kind of crisis that we have created today as far as climate is concerned or food is concerned and so on. Now, the point I'm trying to make is, why can't we change? If we really want to ensure that the world becomes a place good enough for each one of us to survive or live, then I think what we have to do is to change that economic model. It is an economic growth model, which I call as violent, as you rightly mentioned, I call as violent economics, which is basically you are trying to exploit the natural resources for the sake of the benefits that you draw, or some people draw. Now, that is not the way economics should be governed or should be designed. It should be designed on what Bhutan has shown us a way, Global Happiness Index. That should be the way we should all be trying to measure how to survive in these difficult times.
But do you think, Professor, it's possible for 1.3 billion people, and if you include China, another 1.3, so 2.6 to 3 billion people, to actually do away with stock market, to do away with the existing model for the next 20, 30 years? I mean, do you think it's, what you say is you're talking of, in 100 years, the elite would go to the moon. But the point is, if you talk about the next 20 to 30 years, do you think it is feasible?
The elite is already going up to go to the Mars, so let's be very clear about it. But the point I think which you are trying to bring out is very important. The model that China has adopted,
right,
and the model that India is trying to borrow from China is a model of disaster. Let's be very clear, China hasn't done anything great that we should be proud of. What we hear about the goody stories that, we should make Bombay as Shanghai or
right,
New Delhi as New York, I think we should get away from this kind of a fantasy model. What we should try to aim as, let's make Delhi, let's make Bombay. We should not try to ape China. China is why I said classical disaster, China moved the rural population out into the urban areas. They kept that population involved in activities so that, those people could find jobs. I have a number of examples which, if you see my writings, were listed that, how China would make a building of 25 story, then destroy it. Then again rebuild that building so that keep the employment going.
Right.
Otherwise, what would you do with those people? And now the jobs are going to Africa.
So is that not a little bit like MGNREGA, where you have, you have a guaranteed employment scheme? I mean, first of all, are you for or are you against Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee?
See, under the given condition, there was no other option. So I am going a step ahead. I am saying the time has come when even the farmers need to be given a guaranteed income in this country.
Yes.
So
I'll come to that.
Yes.
Because that
so
is
I'm
one
going a
of
step
your,
ahead.
yes.
But the point I think what we are trying to look at China, for instance, and the way they have been trying to keeping the labor engaged was a wrong model. Now China is going to import massive quantity of food to feed its population because the farmers who were involved in agriculture have been moved into become cheaper labor for the industry there in America, in China. So and now there's no jobs because the jobs are going to Africa. Now, if that's the model we're going to borrow, I think is a fundamentally flawed model that we're going to borrow from China. Why can't we think into our own interest and try to bring up a kind of economic model that suits our own interest?
Right.
Why should we always copying? The problem with the Indian economists is that we have learned from my economics books, Economics 201, Economics 301. We haven't gone beyond that. If you look at the debate on the television which is cornered by a few economists of this country, I must acknowledge that those economists, because the anchor doesn't question them anymore, so they get away with the kind of wrong economics that they are trying to propagate. But are
you talking of Jagdish Bhagwati?
I would not like to name them, but the reality is those big names that we talk about have no idea about the ground realities. I don't think they have even gone beyond 10 kilometers out of Delhi to see what the country looks like. And then you find them sitting and coming up with the same kind of arguments which are in the textbook, which they used to study when they were students. Now, for instance, the prices of wheat go up, prices of onion go up. Every time the economist is questioned on a television channels or or otherwise in a panel, the answer would be, it's because of demand and supply. It is not because of demand and supply. There is no shortage as far as supply is concerned. It is only because of manipulation, or because manipulation is a word which is not into, they have not been taught all these years. Only demand and supply. Manipulation doesn't affect as if the kind of inflation that we talk about. No, why? Because that's why I've been saying they have been programmed in a manner they can't look beyond it. Their ability is not there. I think I would say that they don't even have the competence to go beyond what they've been taught in their textbooks to see what the world is really like.
That's a very bold claim, Professor Sharma.
Yes.
I mean, Professor Amartya Sen, Jagdish Bhagwati, Arvind Panagriya. So what you're saying is the economists who are dictating the policy are programmed to think the way they have been taught.
Yes, I've been saying this. Let me give you an example.
What would change that? I mean, for example, let me bring you to, if I may use the phrase, down to earth, because the point is the fact you would also acknowledge is these economists are not going anywhere. They are going to dictate our policy. So what is the solution if you propose that these economists have all got it wrong? What is the solution that you have in mind? I mean, whom should we listen to?
You're very right. Now, let me illustrate what we are trying to discuss.
Right.
In 1996, the World Bank had suggested that 400 million people should be moved out of rural areas in India into urban areas, which would be twice the combined population of UK, France, and Germany. Now, this I thought for many years was a warning to us. But then the Indian economists are repeating the same ad nauseum, and I have the reasons to believe that they can't look beyond that, because the World Bank has given them a mandate, they'll go on repeating it. And that's what the successive governments are also doing it. Now the question is, when you move 400 million people out of the rural areas into urban areas, the urban areas are collapsing. We all know that. And there's no breathing space left in the urban areas. And where are the jobs in the urban areas? Look at the CII, which has now made a statement saying that by 2022, 2022, they would be able to create 300 million jobs. Now 300 million jobs were not created in the first 70 years of India's independence. Now how will they create in the next 4 years? Is because what the World Bank has told them, you move 400 million people out, we haven't done it, so we have to hasten the process. So they are saying we'll create 300 million jobs. 300 million jobs are the jobs of the Hari Mazdoor or of the daily wage workers. Is that job creation? Now, my argument is, why can't these economists re-look at the kind of economics they have been suggesting and suggest how these 400 million people could be provided gainful employment in the rural areas? Now, that should be the priority for economists of India. But I'm sorry to say, majority of them, and I think when I say mainland economists, that's a breed which is creating more problem, are the ones who can't see, because they have been made to understand that economic growth is only possible if you move the population to urban areas. So
I think the catchphrase is, as you put it, gainful employment. Now, Professor Jean Dries has been a proponent of the MGNREGA scheme, and a lot of other, you have the NAC, the National Advisory Council, doing the UPA. That was the flagship that actually brought about the scheme. So, is that not giving a gainful employment?
I'm not looking at that kind of a gainful employment which is dependent on the government providing them a dole every month. What I'm trying to say is, look at the farmers of India, for instance. In 1970, the procurement price of wheat, which is what I think we try to see the way farmers get his economics or his income, is from the MSP. Now, MSP for wheat in 1970 was 76 rupees per quintal. In 2015, it becomes 1450 rupees per quintal, which is an increase of 19 times. Whereas if you look at the salaries of the government employees, they have gone up by 120 to 150 times. The salary of teachers, government teacher, professors in the colleges and so on, has gone up by 150 to 170 times. The salary of the corporate employees have gone up from 300 to 1,000 times. Okay, and the salary of school teachers have gone up by 280 to 300 times in the same period. Going by the economic parity norm, I would have preferred that the farmers get a minimum support price of 7,600 rupees per quintal for wheat. Now, I know economists will jump at it, this is not possible. But please tell me, what wrong has the farmer done? Why is he being penalized to grow wheat or for rice or for any other crop for that matter? So if you bring in parity, then only you can see all sections of the society benefiting. Why are we ensuring that employees get 7th pay commission when they don't deserve it, and whereas you keep the farmers impoverished all these years? Now, this is no economics.
Right.
Now, there has to be some mechanism when you ensure that everyone has to be beneficiary. Sabka saath, sabka vikas. That's the way it should be done. I know that not you trickle down, what Ambani's earn or what Adani earn should go into the hands somehow.
In fact, your views that we've talked about on economics and agriculture are intrinsically tied to your views on science and the way agriculture or science has or has not help science. So let's shift focus to your views, very pertinent views on science as well. So let me begin by saying that you've said that if you do a careful perusal of the FDA recommendation, FDA is the Food, Drug and Administration of USA, you will see a criminal destruction of scientific facts. Now that is a very bold statement to make. So first of all, do you, Professor Sharma, believe in homeopathy? Do you believe in homeopathy?
No, it's not a question of homeopathy or allopathy.
Yeah.
The question of FDA, when I was trying to look at it, is because somebody in America had actually taken FDA to the court.
Right.
And when the FDA court summoned the files, then they looked at it, 40,000 pages came out which were actually questioning the genetically modified technology.
Right.
So it was happening in FDA. And the courts have shown that this is what the FDA was doing. Even now, when the FDA takes decisions in America, we think American system is very efficient. But if you go and ask the Americans, especially those who are standing up to these kinds of decision making, you'll see the system is as flawed as it is in India. Now, the only point I'm trying to make is please don't go by what FDA tells us. You should have the own ability also to evaluate what is good for the country or what is good in the name of science. Now, science.
But for example, if FDA says, you would trust the FDA if it comes out for, let's say, its policies on vaccination. Or would you do that?
No, I don't examine I don't look into the issue of vaccination. Mm-hmm. There are people in this country who are actually deeper into what vaccination is all about. Right. So I don't want to comment on that. But if let's say the areas where I specialize in genetically modified crops, and in my arguments all across the globe also, I have found most scientists, including the Nobel laureates who signed this letter recently.
In fact, I will come to that.
Yes.
So let me begin by actually saying that we now know your views on the economists. Now let's shift focus to your views on the scientists and the science in India. So what you've done is you've actually made pretty damning statements about scientists and science in general in India. So so for example, you've said over years scientists have, with exception, turned out to be more corrupt than the politicians. Institutionalization of corruption in science, technology and economics has already taken a massive human toll. Professor Sharma, what do you mean by this? I mean, that's a very...
When I say, when we in this country have a habit of putting all blame to the politicians.
Right.
We blame politicians for everything. I'm not defending politicians. Mm-hmm. But I have always been standing up and saying that, look, you need to question the scientists who make these recommendations, also question the economists who make that recommendation. Right. Let's say I become the chief minister tomorrow for any particular state. Okay, I don't know what this policy is about. I'll set up a team of economists to suggest me. If those economists are making a wrong suggestion, I don't think I need to be blamed. The economists also equally need to be really hauled up. Similarly, in the case of science, when scientists stand up and make some recommendations without looking at the implications or trying to cover up the negative nuances, which of course were known to them also, I think you need to start questioning the science.
But forgive me, but I think for example, back in the 80s, you would know Ashish Nandi, Shiv Vishwanathan and Vandana Shiva were at the forefront of quite a bizarre movement, if I may call it, called alternate science. And some of the views, for example, are elucidated of views of Ashish Nandi in his book Science, Hegemony and Violence. Yeah. And for example, Vandana Shiva has also written that contrary to the claim of modern science that people are ultimately the beneficiaries of scientific knowledge, people, particularly the poor, are its worst victims. And she goes on a lot, saying that the nexus between modern science and violence is obvious from the fact that 80% of all scientific research is devoted to the war industry and is frankly aimed at large-scale violence. Then you have Shiv Vishwanathan saying that science has no place for the defeated except as objects of an experiment. The objectivity of science is embodied even in the plan of the revolution, be it that of Mao or Stalin. The concentration camp was an industrial research laboratory organized completely by doctors and scientists. The Gandhis and the Mother Teresas are the real scientists. Underlying modernization is a substratum of intolerance, this is Shiv Vishwanathan, from his book on the Annals of the Laboratory State. And when you say, for example, that public sector science is now becoming subservient to private interests, and the Indian science was on a downhill path, was never in question, but that it had already slipped into a cesspool is a revelation. I would say, Professor Sharma, that you're dangerously close to joining that troika of anti-science, science is responsible for all our ills. Would you like to comment on that?
No, I don't think I am against science. If you try to see, all I'm saying is there is good science, there is bad science.
Sure.
The one which is, or the group of scientists or the kind of class that is involved in bad science has also to be really point finger. You have to stand up and point a finger to them also.
Sure.
Now that's what we are trying to say, that this is not good science, this is bad science. The other writers that you mentioned are some people I admire, and are much senior or much more deeper into those issues. I may not be equally competent, but all I'm trying to tell you is that when I look at the Indian science scenario, especially in case of agriculture, you feel so disappointed. Or let me share, when I was a student of agriculture, we need to understand the agriculture universities were borrowed, a concept borrowed from America under the land grant system of education. We didn't even set up the university structures or the buildings according to what the USAID wanted us to do. We also got the curriculum from them. Now the curriculum, when it came to us, we have somehow been programmed, not only the economist, even the scientist. I have been programmed, for instance, in my BSc 4-year or my master's or PhD, is what we have been made to believe, that Indian agriculture is backwards, substandard, inefficient. If you really want to improve your agriculture, you have to follow the European model of agriculture or the Western model for agriculture for that matter. Now, we have brought on those kinds of technologies into India without ascertaining that we had a huge repository of science within the country. Now, we ignored that science, we brushed it aside, we brought in a new culture of science into India, and what has that done? 300,000 farmers committing suicide in the last 20 years. Is that a small collateral damage that we talk about, if at all it is collateral? But the question that we need to ask is, why are these farmers committing suicide? Scientists don't want to accept it. Sadly, no university in India talks about farmer suicides. The Indian Council of Agriculture Research does not want to talk about farmer suicide. They all want to talk about how to bring in genetically modified crops to improve productivity.
So are you saying that the farmer suicides, in fact, you do mention it, in fact, I'll come to that bit, that there is a relation between farmer suicides and what has happened. I'll just talk about that. But let's move on to a view that you briefly also mentioned before, that I said we'll come back to later. So recently, as many as 100 Nobel laureates got together and made a very powerful statement against Greenpeace and those who are, like you, strong opponents of GM crops. So what they said was, we are scientists, we understand the logic of science. It's easy to see what Greenpeace is doing is damaging and is anti-science. Greenpeace initially, and then some of their allies, deliberately went out of their way to scare people. It was a way for them to raise money for their cause. Scientific and regulatory agencies around the world have repeatedly and consistently found crops and foods improved through biotechnology to be as safe as, if not safer, than those derived from any other method of production. There has never been a single confirmed case of a negative health outcome for humans or animals from their consumption. Their environmental impact have been shown repeatedly to be less damaging to the environment and a boon to global biodiversity. Now, your response was astonishing to this letter. What you say is, they are ignorant. They have little idea how the world outside their lab looks like. If ever any of the Nobel laureates feels like moving out of his laboratory to see the ground realities, I would invite them. Professor, so it's you against these 100 Nobel laureates.
See, it's not a question of me being pitted against the 100 Nobel laureates, but I think more important is what they are talking about. I think they have no idea of what the ground realities are. Now, if you see the last sentence of the letter, they have said that by keeping this, especially the golden rice they talk about, is it not a crime against humanity? Yeah. Now, look at what is happening today. That's what I tried to mention. They all talk about productivity. They are blaming Greenpeace or people like me also for that matter, saying that, we create kind of an impression that as if this technology is not good for science and so on. But in reality, it is today the scientists themselves who actually create a fear psychosis. Now, let me give you an example. When they say it's crime against humanity, today about 1 billion people go to bed hungry. The kind of food that we produce today in the world is good enough to feed double the population that exists today. This is what the US Department of Agriculture tells us, which means there is no shortfall in food production or food productivity. Let's be very clear about that. So if we are producing food for double the population, by 2050, we are expecting a population of 9 billion. We already produce food for 13.5 billion people. So there's no point worrying about the productivity part. That is one thing which I wanted to make clear, which the economists or the Nobel laureates are not saying. They are saying we need to raise productivity because we have to meet the challenges of 2050.
So what you're saying is, Professor...
Now, my argument comment, if I just,
sure.
if you allow me to complete.
Please.
All I'm saying is that today 50% food roughly is going waste. Now the effort should be to minimize that wastage rather than saying you raise more productivity, because that benefits the companies like Monsanto or Syngenta and so on.
So you're actually technically, because you're also an MSc in plant breeding, you're not against GMO, you're just against the claims of overproduction. Is that right? Have I read you correctly, or you're against GMO as well?
No. If I'm against GMO is for a different reason, because we are saying that
because what they said in the letter was that the science behind genetically modified organisms has not led to basically contradicts the claims that Greenpeace
makes. Which is basically wrong. This statement also is wrong, because they have signed on a letter which has been given to them by the industry. That's a tragedy. If you see it, yes, this is very clear. I have said that very loudly also, because they have not even read it, or they have not even evaluated that statement particularly. Now, what Greenpeace is saying, I don't know, but what we are saying is the claims that the industry has made all have fallen flat. In 1990s, we were told that with the GM crops, the pesticide usage will come down. On the contrary, pesticide usage has gone up.
I'll come to that.
So where is the gain? Now, I would have thought that the Nobel laureates would start questioning the particular technology. They haven't done it. Now, it is their fault also. I don't think we should be taking blindly what the Nobel laureates tell us. I think they're good in their labs. Let them do their job. And if they're making political statement, they should be at least aware of what they are talking about. If they are not, I think they should be taken to task.
Right. And what you say is, if ever any of the Nobel laureates feels like moving out of his or her laboratory to see the ground realities, I would like to invite them to Punjab, the food bowl, situated in the northwest India. Last year, nearly 300 farmers committed suicide after a deadly attack of whitefly insect on BT cotton ravaged the fields. Now, what you say is, you claim BT cotton varieties are responsible for not offering resistance to the viral attack spread via whiteflies, and the GM seed companies should be held accountable for the unfortunate death of Punjab farmers. But the fact, Professor, is that the extent of whitefly epidemics are a combination of carrier population, virus variations over generations, resistance genes in plant species, also beans, tomatoes, okra, lady's finger, bhindi, are all other hosts of these viruses. And secondly, India also faced a severe whitefly epidemic in 1989. This is the CLCUD virus epidemic, and then in 1994-95. And this was due to the dust storms that blew in the virus-carrying whiteflies from Pakistan. And at that point of time, BT wasn't being cultivated. So do you think Pakistan is responsible for that?
See, this was also something which I used to question at that particular time, that you can't blame the shift in weather, getting into India, and then you blame the insect attack because of that.
But you did.
No.
You said 300.
No, that was at that particular time when you were talking about 1980s.
Yeah.
Now, the question I'm trying to raise is that today, if the farmers in Punjab are dying, it is because of the whitefly ravage that has been done last year. Now, 300 people have died, and interestingly, it's only in the BT cotton varieties that the whitefly damage has been. In the desi varieties, the native varieties, there has been no attack. They have escaped. Now, all these years we are trying to say BT was the only answer for us, but now farmers have shifted to native, even in Punjab. The governments are promoting native varieties now in Punjab. Now, the question that I'm asking is, shouldn't we at some time start questioning this technology if it was going to damage the farmers at one stage or the other? Who should be held responsible then? The industry says, no, we are not responsible. As you rightly said, they have said it's a combination of factors. When the yields go up, it's also a combination of factors. Why is it that it's always when the crop fails, we always blame the weather, but when the crop is, when the crop is good, then we don't blame the weather or give the credit to the weather. Now, that's one thing which I've always been saying. How can these scientists be very let's say, trying to give an impression as if it's the weather is the only villain? But I think weather is also a factor when the yields go up. Then they don't blame the weather, or they give credit to the weather.
But you would also acknowledge that right now, around 200 million hectares is under GM crops worldwide.
We have looked into it.
Not a single case of death has been reported.
We have looked into it. The point I'm trying to make is that how many areas, the area this year has come down incidentally as far as the BT area or the GM area in the world is concerned. But let's also look at it.
Well, it was 170 million in 2014.
Yeah, but this year it has come down.
Yeah.
This year it has come down. But the fact of the matter is that what we are trying to say is, in India, we have had BT cotton as the savior, or let's say silver bullet case. It was following what what China has done some years back. Now the silver bullet in China has also bitten the dust now. In India also it has gone into this thing, disarray. Now why can't we come up with a kind of a agriculture technology where we have a sustainable farming system year after year? Why can't scientists look beyond what the industries are trying to promote? If you look at Argentina, Uruguay, or these kinds of countries, Brazil, you will see that because of GM soybean, there has been a terrible destruction of human health in those countries.
Now,
and this has all been documented.
Right.
This has all been documented. I thought the Nobel laureate should have been questioning that rather than just trying to ignore it and then say GM is the answer.
So for example, Vandana Shiva, who's also a very vocal opponent of GM foods, she's actually she said BT cotton is responsible for a genocide, and in fact her claims were taken up by reputed scientific journals, and they have actually refuted her thing. They've said that the rate of farmer suicide has remained constant over the past decade, even as the area under BT cotton cultivation has shown a dramatic increase, not to mention an equally dramatic jump in cotton production. So for example, BT cotton has led to a 24%, this is paper published in the prestigious Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, impact factor of 10, has led to a 24% increase in cotton yield per acre through reduced pest damage and a 50% gain in cotton profit. Now from 2002 to 2014, Indian cotton production has increased threefold, 13 billion bales equaling China in production yields. The cotton insecticide share in total insecticide usage in India has gone down from 46% to 11%. Wouldn't you say these are impressive figures?
Questionable figures.
Okay.
Questionable figures, and that is why
but this is PNAS paper. This is a scientific.
No problem. That is why I think it is very important for people to stand up and question what is coming out from these kinds of institutions. They are all industry sponsored. By and large, you just have to see how they are surviving or how they are thriving, I would say. Now, just look at example of Professor Seralini of France. When he came up, this comes up with this question.
Sure.
So when he came up with a study which showed that feeding rats after 2 years, 2 years is the lifespan of a rat. This is what happens to, and if you see if you can show your viewers the pictures or the harmful impacts he has shown. His paper was retracted from a scientific journal which was published. Eventually it was found out there was a Monsanto person who had joined that editorial board. Eventually that paper has been republished in another scientific journal. Now the question that I think needs to be asked is, why can't they reevaluate those studies? Why can't they do more studies like that to establish whether it is happening or not, rather than debunking a kind of a question that is asked, which is question the science or technology.
But Professor Sharma, you do realize that transgenic is but a tertiary stage of crop breeding. I mean, humans have carried out primary, secondary stages for 10,000 or more years. So, for example, let me give you an example of miracle rice, the IR varieties 8 or 64, have undergone thousands of mutations through breeding. This is genetic modification too. The maize cob, for example, has increased dramatically over thousands of years. The wild maize tough coating is now gone. Now, for example, if you take Professor Burlog, the Nobel laureate who got the Nobel Peace Prize for introducing the dwarf varieties. Now, he is responsible primarily for the dwarf varieties or rust resistance line. Now, had he done it through genetic modification of wheat, would you have opposed it?
If you enjoyed that, click up here to support us and down here to subscribe. Be sure to check out our older episodes and the other stuff we do, like Can You Take It, I Agree, panel discussions, comics and animations, and much, much more.